afternoon, everyone, and welcome to one of our biannual highlights at Small Wonder, an event to celebrate the culmination of the Asham competition and the publication of the resulting Asham Anthology, which contains work by both the competition winners as well as established writers. On this occasion, Susie Boyt, Helen Dunmore.
How are we really competing with animals?
On this occasion, Susie Boyt and Helen Dunmore. Right, this is the point where I'm going to stop. And I was going to finish this by apologising in advance for the noises off and the fact that it's even possible you might hear a milk churn in the middle of the readings. So if a machine starts whirring, that's the explanation. So once again, Susie Boyt, Helen Dunmore next to her. As Helen Dunmore was also a judge for the competition, together with the marvellous travel author and biographer Sara Wheeler, who's sitting next to her. And the other judge for the competition was Lennie Goodings, at the end, the publisher of Virago. And the president, and the Queen of Virago, I'm sure. As most of you know, the Asham Trust was established to encourage aspiring female writers, so it's fitting that the current anthology, as well as the previous one, have both been published by that iconic press, Virago, whose publisher, Lennie Goodings, will chair today's event. Asham takes its name from a house near here that Virginia Woolf used to rent before she acquired her own Sussex home. So the Asham Award also honours one of our greatest female writers closely associated with Charleston. And this occasion, on this particular afternoon, it's especially celebratory as it marks the 40th anniversary of Virago, as well as the 10th birthday of Small Wonder, which was originally set up in association with the Asham Trust. So it's my pleasure now to welcome Susie and Helen, who read from the stories that they contributed to the Asham Anthology, as well as Sara Wheeler, who'll read from the beautiful folio edition of Flannery O'Connor's short stories, which is a perfect cue, a moment for me to thank the Folio Society for sponsoring this event. So I will welcome and hand over to Lennie Goodings for the rest of the session. Lennie Goodings. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. It's very nice to see you. In fact, I can't see you, but I can see there's a lot of you out there. And what I'm especially pleased about is that I know there are a lot of women in the audience who are contributors and winners, as we call them, in Once Upon a Time There Was a Traveler, which is the book we're here to celebrate. So you know it's a collection of short stories. It's edited by Kate Pullinger, who's also here, published by Virago, and it's judged by Sara and Helen and me. But there's a tradition with the Asham Award to also have, alongside the debut writers, ask for new stories. And in this case, we have a new story from Susie Boyt and one from Helen Dunmore. So what we're going to do is listen to some wonderful stories, which we started listening to in an earlier event when we awarded the prizes. We just got a sort of snippet of the beginning of that wonderful thing, Once Upon a Time. I don't know if you're like me, but I can't imagine you're not if you're here. But once upon a time there was. When I hear those words, I just feel bliss. I love the anticipation. I love to be read to, actually, and I think it's a sad thing. The older you get, the less that happens to you. So we're going to start with the seduction of being read to. And then we're going to have about... I'm sure... Oh, my God. I guess that's approval. So what we're going to have is about 15 minutes from each of our readers, and at the end, then we're going to talk about stories, about the art of the short story, the truth of the short story, the difficulty or the ease of the short story, and the status I think we should look at too. So we're going to start with Helen Dunmore. Helen Dunmore, just a minute, I have to say who you are first. I'm beginning to think this is the Renaissance woman here. I'm going to tell you about Helen. She's a poet, she's a novelist, she's a short story, a novella writer, and a children's writer. So I pulled up her biography, and because I thought, oh, that's a lot of books. It is. 46. Just damn impressive. She won the first Orange Prize for her novel, A Spell of Winter, and has won prizes for her poetry. And she's translated into more than 30 languages. Her most recent novel is The Betrayal. But today she's reading from Once Upon a Time, There Was a Traveler.
Thank you very much, Lennie, and it's a great pleasure to be here on this day of celebration for the short story. And can you all hear at the back comfortably? Good, excellent. This story is called Duty Free. They were the cleanest airport floors I've ever seen. Even so, a man was buffing up sparkles in a corner of the duty free beside a display of silver leprechauns. I was not quite the only customer in the half-acre of perfume, whiskey and cosmetics. 2 or 3 of us drifted desultory, fingering, but failing to buy. The goods that shone inside the cabinets seemed to have nothing to do with us. A sound system played music that broke on our ears as the waves break on the shore. The staff was so attentive, so knowledgeably eager to carry out the tasks which could not be completed without the absent passengers. Even as you quaked for their jobs, you could not help warming to their unfounded optimism. Friendly were the security staff, gassing to one another about a football match. No one mentioned the result. Perhaps they'd all stopped watching at the same moment to keep up the suspense for yet another working day. Warm and tasty drifted the smells of chili con carne and mushroom lasagna in the restaurant. I ordered a cup of coffee. "Will there be anything to eat with that?" sang the young man behind the counter, and I had to fight not to ask for the whole sweep of it, piping hot, just so that his face would light up. But he flourished the coffee onto the counter before me and smiled as if mine were exactly the order he had been hoping for. The mica glitter of the floors was getting to me. I'm easily disorientated, and on my way back through duty-free, I was busy counting the small airport tasks that I had yet to carry out. Buying a bottle of water and the newspaper if they had it, checking my email and the price of Chanel No. 5. So I organized even my empty hours. There was a recycling bin handy, and there I sorted and threw away the papers from the conference I'd just attended. I held on to the timetable for a moment. It was marked out with notes, and the couple of sessions I'd presented were highlighted in green, the colour of a knot in the stomach. Strange how things could be so important, and then not important at all. When I looked up, the desert had flowered. The duty-free was packed. Scores of soldiers, men and women, both of them, 100 of them, no, many more than 100, milled purposefully around the displays or lined up in front of the tills. They had big boots and pale, sandy uniforms. They were large, eager, polite, weary. You could see their health and youth in their springing hair and quick, observant glances. Their skin, however, was poor. They all wanted to buy something in the short time that they had. Packed into bulky trousers, women, soldiers compared lipsticks. Men queued for cologne. Names were murmured like prayers. L'Oreal, Shiseido, Versace, Prada, Paco Rabanne. Even though the duty-free hall was now full, it was not far from quiet. The assistants had risen to great heights and were changing dollars into euros in their heads as they advised on a set of headphones while clicking up a fragrance purchase. Politeness flowed over us all, as ample as a river. "This one is €73, or would you prefer a larger size?" We were at home again, in the kingdom of our preferences. Cabinets were opened and disclosed their contents to eager hands. White glossy packages were fetched down from the highest shelves. Leprechauns tinkled against one another. I fell into the swing of it and began to search among the lipsticks for number 719, the one I always wear. A young woman soldier alongside me waved a perfume tester strip beneath her nostrils. She had stains of fatigue under her eyes. "Maybe this one wasn't right for her," she said. All she could smell was aeroplane. You can't go wrong with Chanel No. 5. It's a classic, I said, as I say to my daughter. The soldier's face lightened. I guess it is, but I don't know if it works on me, she said. She sprayed again. On her wrist this time, and she turned it this way and that. She had a southern voice. Her skin was pitted, not beautiful. Where are you all going? I asked her. Afghanistan. I think it works on you, I said, breathing in the wrist she held up to me. There was her body smell under the perfume. It was dry, powdery, and somewhat metallic. She was correct. She smelt of aeroplane. It was a short stopover for refueling. These soldiers must have spent thousands of dollars in their brief time off the plane. After they had made their purchases, they sat quietly on banks of plastic seats in the hall outside the duty-free, waiting for the tannoy. The bulk of their uniforms made them sprawl somewhat, legs apart, but not as students sprawl, ostentatiously at leisure, infantry of the gap-year dream. Other travellers can only envy that. These soldiers rested. The group beside me talked of mobile phones as if there were nothing else in the world. How vast the airport was and how bare of purpose. The life in it, for which it had been built, had sunk down to barely a murmur. Cafes, departure gates, transit lounges, and scanners were becalmed. A coffee machine hissed to itself. Only everywhere, as far as the eye could see, there were these soldiers. Where are you all going? Afghanistan. They were not even born in the days when the boldest of my generation took the magic bus to Kabul in search of Afghan gold. Here they sat, composed, under orders, touching Irish soil, or at least their boots touched mica particles in the flooring that caught the light as far as the eye could see. They were not unhandsome, some of them. The girls, too, rested utterly, closing their eyes so that the harsh overhead light exposed the pure cut of their lids and every blackhead in their overworked skins. All the same, they were not unbeautiful. There was one low-key call for their flight. Immediately, they were on the move, down the long hall, through an exit which had nothing to do with the civilian airport. There was no gathering of hand luggage, mustering of children, wheelchairs, pushchairs. The soldiers were there 1 minute, filling the lounge, and then they were gone, through a flap that had appeared somewhere in the wall of the airport, revealing it to be no more than a transit shed which had served its purpose. On my left, the duty-free still glittered. Now there came 4 or 5 stragglers who had just succeeded in making their purchases. They loped past me, and for the first time I saw that they were fit and fast for all their heaviness. They quickened almost to a canter, laughing for the first time. Then they, too, disappeared. The tin shed turned back into an airport. The soldiers' big-bellied plane was already receiving them into itself. An incident, I thought, a notable moment, equal to the sighting of rare passerands. But I was mistaken, because at that time they came in almost daily. 250,000 UK military personnel, it seems, went through that airport in 1 year alone. Backwards and forwards the planes go, settling briefly in this small space of Irish soil, releasing their uniformed passengers. The lifeblood of the duty-free, now that the Celtic tiger is a shame-faced joke, and the acres of car park around the airport stand empty. They go up slowly, those big-bellied planes. They are far from new, and they labour sometimes under the weight of what they carry. The youth inside them, packed into flesh, packed into uniform, and then filling the metal skin of the DC-10. The youth that comes once and doesn't come again. Where are you all going? Afghanistan. Beautiful place, Shannon, in its arrivals and its departures. A dream of water, an enlacement of low-lying land by shining tributaries. As your plane rises, you see it clear. And then the wing tilts, and the sky is there instead, reeling away from you, all that greyness thickening to muffle your eyes, your ears, your lips. You will never see the earth again. You say goodbye to it without emotion among the whiteness, as if this is the death you have always expected. But as it happens, this time the plane keeps climbing, and you punch through the clouds and out into the blue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I know that's a very powerful story, and I've read it many times, but to hear it, incredible. So, Sara Wheeler is the author of 5 travel books and 3 biographies, and probably unlike the rest of us judges, she has really traveled. She spent 7 months in Antarctica for her international bestseller Terra Incognita, Travels in Antarctica. She traveled to Russia, to Alaska, to Greenland, to Canada, and North Norway to write her book, The Magnetic North. And she's written about women who traveled to America in Oh My America. And at the moment, she's learning Russian. Today, she's going to read us a short story by Flannery O'Conner, and it'd be nice if you start telling us why you chose this one. Thanks.
Of course, yeah. Well, it's wonderful to be here, and I've really enjoyed being involved with this short story competition, not least because it's difficult not to feel as a non-fiction writer, which I am in my DNA, that I'm a different species among you all. But what I've learned is there's only one difference, really, between fiction writers and non-fiction writers, and that is that non-fiction writers make it all up. One of my great heroines is Flannery O'Conner, and I've chosen this story because one of my favourites. It seems to me it's almost the perfect short story. But let me say one more thing on the subject of fiction and non-fiction, which is really saying the same thing but in another way. Somebody asked V.S. Naipaul, who we might argue is the greatest living writer of English prose, why he'd never written an autobiography. And he said, well, I could have done, but with non-fiction you can rearrange the facts here and there, but fiction never lies. And I kind of think that's right, and we might talk later perhaps about the hierarchy of literature, and I think probably all non-fiction writers like me that think that fiction is in fact at a higher level, and of course poetry is right at the top. We can talk about all of that. But Flannery O'Conner, my great heroine, was born in the south of the United States, in Savannah, in 1925. And this story is called A Late Encounter with the Enemy. I may get to the end of it, and if I don't, you'll have to go and read it for yourselves.
Sarah, just before you start, can everybody hear okay? Fine.
General Sash was 104 years old. He lived with his granddaughter, Sally Poker Sash, who was 62 years old and who prayed every night on her knees that he would live until her graduation from college. The general didn't give 2 slaps for her graduation, but he never doubted he would live for it. Living had got to be such a habit with him that he couldn't conceive of any other condition. A graduation exercise was not exactly his idea of a good time, even if, as she said, he would be expected to sit on the stage in his uniform. She said there would be a long procession of teachers and students in their robes, but that there wouldn't be anything to equal him in his uniform. He knew this well enough without her telling him. And as for the damn procession, it could march to hell and back and not cause him a quiver. He liked parades with floats full of Miss Americas and Miss Daytona beaches and Miss Queen cotton products. He didn't have any use for processions, and a procession full of school teachers was about as deadly as the river Styx to his way of thinking. However, he
he was willing to sit on the stage in his uniform so that they could see him. Sally Poker was not as sure as he was that he would live until her graduation. There had not been any perceptible change in him for the last 5 years, but she had the sense that she might be cheated out of her triumph, because she so often was. She had been going to summer school every year for the past 20 years, because when she started teaching, there were no such thing as degrees. In those times, she said, everything was normal, but nothing had been normal since she was 16, and for the past 20 summers, when she should have been resting, she had to take a trunk in the burning heat to the State Teachers' College, and though when she returned in the fall, she always taught in the exact way she had been taught not to teach. This was a mild revenge that didn't satisfy her sense of justice. She wanted the general at her graduation because she wanted to show what she stood for, or, as she said, what all was behind her and was not behind them. This them was not anybody in particular. It was just all the upstarts who had turned the world on its head and unsettled the ways of decent living. That could have been written in The Guardian today, by the way. It's always been thus. She meant to stand on that platform in August with the general sitting in his wheelchair on the stage behind her, and she meant to hold her head very high as if she was saying, see him, my kin, all you upstarts, glorious upright old man, standing for the old traditions, dignity, honour, courage, see him." One night in her sleep she screamed, see him, and turned her head and found him sitting in his wheelchair behind her with a terrible expression on his face and with all his clothes off except the general's hat, and she'd waked up and not dared to go back to sleep again that night. For his part, the general would not have consented even to attend her graduation if she hadn't promised to see to it that he sit on the stage. He liked to sit on any stage. He considered that he was still a very handsome man. When he had been able to stand up, he'd measured 5 feet 4 inches of pure gamecock. He had white hair that reached to his shoulders behind, and he would not wear teeth because he thought his profile was more striking without them. When he put on his full-dress general's uniform, he knew well enough that there was nothing to match him anywhere. This was not the same uniform he had worn in the war between the states. He had not actually been a general in that war. He had probably been a foot soldier. He didn't remember what he'd been. In fact, he didn't remember that war at all. It was like his feet, which hung down, now shriveled at the very end of him without feeling, covered with a blue-grey afghan that Sally Poker had crocheted when she was a little girl. He didn't remember the Spanish-American War, in which he'd lost a son. He didn't even remember the sun. He didn't have any use for history, because he never expected to meet it again. To his mind, history was connected with processions and life with parades, and he liked parades. People were always asking him if he remembered this or that, a dreary black procession of questions about the past. There was only one event in the past that had any significance for him and that he cared to talk about, and that was 12 years ago when he'd received the general's uniform and had been in the premiere. "I was in that preview they had in Atlanta," he would tell visitors sitting on his front porch, "surrounded by beautiful girls. It wasn't a thing local about it. It was nothing local about it. Listen here. It was a national event, and they had me in it, up on the stage. There was no bobtails at all. Every person at it had to pay $10 to get in and had to wear his tuxedo. I was in this uniform. A beautiful girl presented me with it that afternoon in a hotel room." "It was in a suite in the hotel, and I was in it too, Papa," Sally Poker would say, winking at the visitors. "You weren't alone with any young lady in a hotel room." "Was, I'd have known what to do," the old general would say with a sharp look, and the visitors would scream with laughter. "This was Hollywood, California, girl," he'd continue. "She was from Hollywood, California, and didn't have any part in the picture. Out there they have so many beautiful girls that they don't need that they call an extra, and they don't use them for nothing but presenting people with things and having their pictures taken. They took my picture with her. Nope. It was 2 of them. One on either side of me, and me in the middle with my arms around each of them's waist, and their waist weren't any bigger than a $50. Sally Pitcher would interrupt again. It was Mr. Gavisky that gave you the uniform, Papa, and he gave me the most exquisite corsage. Really, I wish you could have seen it. It was made with gladiator petals taken off and painted gold and put together, looked like a rose. It was exquisite. I wish you could have seen it. It was as big as her head. The general would snarl. I was telling it. They give me this uniform and they give me this sword and they say, now, General, we don't want you to start a war on us. All we want you to do is march right up on that stage when you're introduced tonight and answer a few questions. Think you can do that? Think I can do that? Listen here, I hollered. I was doing things before you was born. He was the hit of the show, Sally Poker would say, but she didn't much like to remember the premiere on account of what had happened to her feet at it. She'd bought a new dress for the occasion, a long black crepe dinner dress with a rhinestone buckle and a bolero, and a pair of silver slippers to wear with it, because she was supposed to go up on the stage with him, to keep him from falling. Everything was arranged for them. A real limousine came at 10 minutes to 8 and took them to the theatre. It drew up under the marquee at exactly the right time, after the big stars and the director and the author and the governor and the mayor and some less important stars. The police kept traffic from jamming, and there were ropes to keep the people off who couldn't go. All the people who couldn't go watched them step out of the limousine into the lights. Then they walked down the red and gold foyer, and an usherette in a Confederate cap and a little short skirt conducted them to their special seats. The audience was already there, and a group of UDC members began to clap when they saw the general in his uniform. And that started everybody to clap. A few more celebrities came after them, and then the doors closed and the lights went down. A young man with blonde wavy hair who said he represented the motion picture industry came out and began to introduce everybody, and each one who was introduced walked up onto the stage and said how really happy he was to be here for this great event. The general and his granddaughter were introduced 16th in the programme. He was introduced as General Tennessee Flintrock Sash of the Confederacy, though Sally Poker had told Mr. Gavisky that his name was George Poker Sash and he'd only been a major. She helped him up from his seat, but her heart was beating so fast that she didn't know whether she'd make it herself. The old man walked up the aisle slowly, with his fierce white head high and his hat held over his heart. The orchestra began to play the Confederate battle hymn very softly, and the UDC members rose as a group and did not sit down again until the general was on the stage. When he reached the centre of the stage with Sally Poker just behind him, guiding his elbow, the orchestra burst out in a loud rendition of the battle hymn, and the old man, with real stage presence, gave a vigorous, trembling salute and stood at attention until the last blast had died away. 2 of the usherettes in Confederate caps and short skirts held a Confederate and a Union flag crossed behind them. The general stood in the exact centre of the spotlight, and it caught a weird moon-shaped slice of Sally Poker, the corsage, the rhinestone buckle, and one hand clenched around a white glove and a handkerchief. The young man with the blonde wavy hair inserted himself into the circle of light and said he was really happy to have here tonight for this great event one, he said, who had fought and bled in the battles they would soon see daringly reenacted on the screen. And, tell me, General, he asked, how old are you? 92! The general screamed. The young man looked as if this were just about the most impressive thing that had been said all evening. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, let's give the general the biggest hand we've got. And there was applause immediately, and the young man indicated to Sally Poker with a motion of his thumb that she could take the old man back to his seat now so the next person could be introduced. But the general had not finished. He stood immovable in the exact centre of the spotlight, his neck thrust forward, his mouth slightly open, and his voracious grey eyes drinking in the glare and the applause. He elbowed his granddaughter, roughly away. "How I keep so young," he screeched. "I kiss all the pretty girls." This was met with a great din of spontaneous applause, and it was at just that instant that Sally Poker looked down at her feet and discovered that in the excitement of getting ready, she'd forgotten to change her shoes. 2 brown Girl Scout Oxfords protruded from the bottom of her dress. She gave the general a yank and almost ran with him off the stage. He was very angry that he had not got to say how glad he was to be here for this event, and on the way back to his seat he kept saying as loud as he could, "I'm glad to be here at this preview with all these beautiful girls." But there was another celebrity going up the other aisle. Nobody paid any attention to him. He slept through the picture, muttering fiercely every now and then in his sleep. I'm not going to get to the end of this, but that's good because it means you're going to have to read it. But I'll read one more paragraph. Since then, his life had not been very interesting. His feet were completely dead now. His knees worked like old hinges. His kidneys functioned when they would, but his heart persisted doggedly to beat. The past and the future were the same thing to him, one forgotten and the other not remembered. He had no more notion of dying than a cat. Every year on Confederate Memorial Day, he was bundled up and lent to the Capital City Museum, where he was displayed from 1 to 4 in a musty room full of old photographs, old uniforms, old artillery, and historic documents. All these were carefully preserved in glass cases so that children would not put their hands on him. He wore his general's uniform from the premiere and sat with a fixed scowl inside a small roped area. There was nothing about him to indicate that he was alive, except an occasional movement in his milky grey eyes. But once, when a bold child touched his sword, his arm shot forward and slapped the hand off in an instant. In the spring, when the old homes were open for pilgrimages, he was invited to wear his uniform and sit in some conspicuous spot and lend atmosphere to the scene. Some of these times he only snarled at visitors, but sometimes he told about the premiere and the beautiful girls. And to find out what happens, you have to read the rest of it yourself. And remember, it wasn't me that wrote that. It was Flannery O'Conner, and she'd be very pleased that you've all listened to it and laughed her story.
Thank you. Even on the evidence of these 2 stories, who could ever doubt the capacity to tell life in a short story? Now we finished with Susie Boyt. Susie is the author of 5 novels and a memoir, My Judy Garland Life, which was shortlisted for a major memoir prize and which is being staged next year at the Nottingham Playhouse. Her latest novel is The Small Hours, which we publish at Virago, and she has written a weekly column in the Financial Times since 2002. Her specialities outside her own work are Henry James and the poet John Berryman. Susie's going to read from her story, which is in the book, Documentary at Clairvale Lodge.
This is a story about 2 antique film stars who are living in a retirement home. Marigold is the big star, and Gloria is her friend and her assistant. A young man has come to make a documentary about them, causing much excitement. When I first saw Marigold, she was clutching a bouquet of marigolds, wearing an emerald gown, satin with lilac beading at the hem. No one dressed like that in England then. She was like a mirage. It was the complete package. Golden hair from Regent Street, beautiful shoes, gloves always. You have to understand the impression she created. I was in Piccadilly coming out of the Underground and she was going into the Café Royal. The way she moved stopped me in my tracks. There was mystery, there was sex appeal. People thought she must be from America. And then, not long after, Bob took me to a show and there she was again. Only a smallish part, but she had one number and was wearing these striped cocktail pajamas with evening sandals. And afterwards I saw her come out of the stage door with a beautiful young man on her arm, and she had on this breathtaking dress, black crepe with a big beating heart appliqued on the bodice and arrows of love shooting out down the front. Can you imagine? We actually met the first time with friends of Bob's at the Café de Paris. He knew the maitre d' slightly, got us a good table, and Marigold came and sat down with a friend of his. Bob's agent was there too. The nicest man in London, people used to call him. And if you were one of his, he'd greet you like a long-lost friend, and a terrific slap on the back, maybe even a bear hug, made you feel you were the one actor in London he really wanted to see. And as he gripped you, he slowly manoeuvred you towards the door, all the time telling you how happy he was to see you, how fine you looked, and how excellent the prospects were for you next month. And by the time you said goodbye, he'd practically pushed you down the stairs. Why am I telling you that? There was a point. Yes, I simply couldn't believe that someone as beautiful as Marigold could also be sincere, so sincere. The glamour that is today is simply nothing compared to what she had. The hats had to be seen to be believed. A gondola with a little waterfall of lace with a fish motif woven into it to represent the lagoon, just on a Tuesday. When we were first in New York, she got this Broadway show straight away, a small part, a thing called Johnny 2x4. It was $30 a week and our rent was $23. She played the cigarette girl. We were living in a ladies' theatrical hotel, but some of those ladies were no ladies. We only ate when people took us out. Befeathered, bejeweled and befurred we were after dark. We were 18 going on 35. All the girls lent us their best things, and we did too as soon as we got anything good enough to loan. And you know who else had a small part in that show? Betty Bacall. We used to jitterbug between rehearsals, but she contracted the measles, had it for most of the run. We thought it very unprofessional. So measles-free, we took New York by storm. It was a depression, but were we depressed, as the song says? Nowhere near. All our money went into our clothes. It was an investment. She used to wear this shell-pink silk velvet ombre evening skirt, a Dior copy from Paris, was it? I remember it like yesterday. Looked a tiny bit as though someone had thrown a barrel of pink champagne over you, and she used to pair it with a tiny white cashmere with a perfect heart-shaped moth hole just below the left shoulder. Drove people wild. Can you imagine? And later, when she met Louis and went to Hollywood, it wasn't our kind of place, naturally, but we made our mark, didn't we? And the parties that she had. Louis loved a full house. He loved everyone singing at the piano and everyone in beaded gowns. We were just happy to be able to eat every day. What luxury. He liked to serve these mountains of pink and red crustacea on mermaid-shaped platters and rivers of champagne. You could swim in it. Once I did. Once she did. They used to install these beautiful marble urns filled with flowers, not just in the house, but lit up with pink lights in the garden. It was so elegant. I just adore tall flower arrangements outside. Used to have these white roses with a strong lemon scent and honeysuckle and tendrils of ivy trailing everywhere, and in the springtime, silver ice buckets crammed with apple blossom. The flowers here disappoint me 50 times a day. I know, dear, I'm trying to do something about it. And there was this fashion then for very low-hung crystal chandeliers everywhere, very fluffy in appearance, French crystal, I think it was, and she put them in all the bedrooms, 2 feet off the ground, pairs of them next to all the bedsides in place of reading lamps. Can you imagine? She was more Hollywood than the natives. I came back one evening from London. My mother was bad, and I'd gone to see what could be done, and Hines let me in. And I remember hearing Marigold tell the decorator, "Oh, do use that red silk velvet, you know, that intense throbbing crimson, like in Gigi." And I remember thinking, Lord, we've come an awfully long way from the Dudley Hippodrome. So many funny things, Gloria. Remember you found that gardener called Ava? Marvellous hulk of a girl. She was so strong. That was when you were still with Louis, before we all came back from Calais, and before he... Deborah, was it, his third wife, the ballet dancer? Paulette, I think. Yes, Paulette. Why am I talking about her? Were you going to say that thing she wrote in her memoir? Oh, yes, let me get it right. Sometimes I think the only thing he ever gave me was athlete's foot, but such a beautiful man. Yes, he was. When you were standing in front of him, it was actually a bit difficult to believe. He was like an oil painting of a famous hero that everyone adored. Is he still with us, do you suppose? No, he left us sadly, 10 years ago, I think, maybe 12. The routine here has a limited appeal. We don't join in on principle, do we? We are not life's joiners-inners. That's right, we're in a world of our own making. It's so much nicer. They call us the girls here. It's what they called us when we started at the Empire. But we keep our distance. We are a little bit grand. A star is a star is a star. But we're gracious, though, aren't we, Gloria? Oh, yes, we're all about that. Unless, you know, we're provoked. Some of the gents who live here claim they knew us from the old days. They like to tease her. You wouldn't have even spoke to me back then, would you, Marigold? Aloof, forbidden. She wouldn't have even given you the drops from her nose. Not that I'd have had 'em. Oh, yes. Now, this bit I do feel strongly about. You see, Marigold was the first person I knew who really loved music the way I did. From the inside out is how we always thought of the songs. We'd listen to love songs and think about the girls in those situations, the American girls, Ella and Dinah and Deanna and Judy and Billy, looking for and finding and losing love. Billy took things very hard. I used to listen to the records like it was a novel. So in one song she's in love, and then the next it's all gone wrong, then it's wonderful again, then she seems to have shot him. It was all very confusing. Why did they get into these predicaments? Why did they keep getting into them? The thing is, Gloria, if you fall for a playboy, fair enough, you're a fool to yourself. It happens to all of us now and then. You know how it is. Wherever you go, you see people looking at you as though you're a lamb to the slaughter, and you feel a bit foolish and confused. But do you really think you could try and get him to move to a farm? If that's what you think's going to happen, then you ought to be shot. Well, yes, but do you think that's why people move to the country? How do you mean? To keep their menfolk, away from harm? Well, when you put it like that, it does have the ring of truth. Is that what people think I should have done with Jack? I don't know, my love. Perhaps we really never know these things. It's such a long time ago, but we're all right. If you've ever waited for someone, in a way, you wait for them always. But coming back to your early question, everyone else I had met up till then thought the songs just didn't bear being gone into, but I thought they did, and so did Marigold. Yes, I do. Like in Making Whoopee, when it says, she sits alone most every night, he doesn't phone or even write. Everyone knows that phoning takes less effort than letter writing, so it should say, and easily could say, shouldn't it, he doesn't write or even phone. And everyone says it's just because of the rhyme. But I say it's Cole Porter we're talking about. He wouldn't use the wrong word just because of the rhyme. It should be, most every night she sits alone, he doesn't write or even phone. That makes so much more sense. There's so much that's maddening, Gloria. I mean, people always sing, it's all right with me, as though it's a sweet, enchanting thing, but actually it's so hard-hearted. There's a powerful man, predatory, trawling a bar or a party, trying to pick up a girl, any girl, because the one he likes isn't free. It's a song about someone really looking for a quick It should be sung hard, with hard eyes, worldly and menacing. But people don't do it like that. They sing it like a love song. Why do people who don't care about people pretend to be romantic? I can't stand it. That song always makes me think about Bob. He would show an interest in a pillar box when Joan was out of town. Well, yes, he would. Or a lamppost, a bollard, a Belisha beacon. He did always like flashy women. Oh, Marigold, stop. When I was dressing at the Palladium, it was a wonderful place to work. We didn't think of it as a theatre. We thought of it almost as a cathedral. And backstage, it was like a labyrinth with all the stairs and passageways. Anyway, Marigold, she was in California, and she would ring me up on Sunday nights. This was in the late 50s. And we would have the most wonderful chinwags, as we called them in our day. Yes, and sometimes whole conversations made up of song lyrics. So she'd say something like, oh, I don't know, I might be a bit down and say, I had that feeling of self-pity. And she'd say, dinner for one, please, James. And I'd say, picking on a wishbone from the Frigidaire. And she'd say, I've got a little story I want you to know. And I'd say, as the adding machine once said, you can count on me. And she'd say, I'm in love with this wonderful guy. And I'd say, with nights of tropical splendor. And she'd say, what made you think I was one of those girls? And I'd say, is it more don't throw bouquets at me? And she'd say, my romance doesn't need a castle rising in Spain. And I'd say, Darby and Joan who used to be Jack and Jill kind of stuff. And she'd say, I'm biding my time. And I'd say, what is this thing called love? And she'd say, well, I don't understand the Parisians. Except it was much better than that. Dinner here is at 6:15. Can you believe it? I don't get hungry for dinner at 6. I wear a ball gown with beige control nicks. There's usually some kind of show in the evening, a bit of singing. No one can dance anymore, but we say the name of the steps and mark the routine with the flats of our hands. A sherry or a martini they bring us at 2:45. They allow only one, but it can be as big as you like. We like to shop for glasses in the vase department, don't we, Gloria? No, we don't. She's joking. Don't scratch that. And when you came to visit, my parents said, "Good God, what is it? You are on a roll this afternoon, Marigold. The soap pays for all this. It's all right here. We provide our own glamour. There's not too many low-hung chandeliers. We were awfully hoity about telly to begin with, but you have to bend with the times. I wasn't born to stately halls of alabaster. I haven't given many balls for Mrs. Astor. Isn't she wonderful? A hairdresser comes twice a week to sort us out. She does our nails if there's time, and any other bits and bobs." And so, after I stopped working so much myself, I didn't want to be a dresser for the rest of my life, because there was only so many times I could say, "You were a knockout, Miss Kerr." I began devoting more and more time to organising Marigold's career, running the fan club, answering the mail, sending out the 10x8s. We accept any charity requests involving children and animals, especially if it's local. Otherwise, they must provide a car and a driver. Requests come in all the time. There's just one last thing I must tell you about Marigold. She's never once been in a rehabilitation centre. There's not been one breakdown. She has stolen no other woman's husband. There have been no suicide attempts. There have been no neglected children to pen revenge memoirs, no shoplifting incidents, no dicey investments, nothing that could be called anything approaching an episode. She's not even worn a bad dress. There's nothing on her, not one thing. Tell me, who else on this earth of her caliber, on this insane planet, can one say that about? You tell me, young man. I do apologise about Gloria. She really is the end. Sorry, dear, I am too much sometimes. Anyway, time's ticking on. A man's coming to do stretches with us in half an hour. Luigi, in Italian. Both my hips are alien now, bionic or what have you, and one of my knees. The choreographers I could sue if I could only remember their names. And those of us who can no longer stretch do chair aerobics to the music. I wish I could still dance. You know, these days, I can't even really bear to look in the mirror. Marigold, I'm afraid I won't stop weeping when I see what's gone. I can't even sing in tune anymore. Why did we have to get old? It goes against my pride so. Darling, here, let me just turn your head away, dear. Put your back to the camera, then they won't be able to use it. Turn the camera off now, young man. Is that all right? Right now. Oh, good, thank you. Thank you. Can you just leave the room for a moment, just so that I can pull the door behind, could you? It's all right, darling. You're tremendously brave about everything, and the wonderful thing is, everybody loves you, just as they always have done and always will. You are a shining meteor who merely by existing has brought pleasure to millions and millions of people. Marigold, listen to me, listen. You know, everything you've ever been, everything marvelous that's happened to you, every extravagant sunset, every beam of moonshine, every pearl, every sable, and every close-up, it's all still there. Every last bit of it. All of it shines out of you like the most dazzling ray of starlight, lifting up the hearts of the world. Oh, say it again, darling. Say it again.
Oh, that was great. Wasn't that? Really, again, one I'd read, not heard. Hearing it is very good. Okay, so we have, about 15 minutes. Yeah? 15 minutes. And I'm going to ask each of our writers a question and see how we get on. So what I thought I'd start with is Helen. The thing that's quite remarkable about your career is, as I said, 46 books is very impressive. And lots of different forms. So we've got poetry, novels, short stories, novella, and children's books. So I'd like to just ask you about the form and how you decide which of the forms you'll take when you have an idea or...
Well, probably the form comes before the idea, I would say, particularly with poetry, because, in fact, I would say that poetry and the short story are probably the most akin of forms. I don't know why that is. There's something about the music of them and the succinctness. And poetry is something you have to catch out of the corner of your eye. Or, well, really, it's more a rub on the ear, a sound, a texture. And very often with the short story, it's a small snatch of a voice or just a fragment, really. For example, with that story set in Shannon Airport, there was just something about the way that young woman soldier was smelling the perfume stick and the way she pronounced the word Afghanistan that touched me to the heart. It really was extraordinary. It was some moments just go right through you. And I believe also that when you're flying, you're in a different state, because you're in a state of disconnection, possibly fear. You're not in any way in your normal life. So in the story, I wanted to keep doubling that. But I'm probably a very much a listening writer, and poetry comes and goes, and you can't force poetry at all. Whereas with a novel, if you're having a bad day with it, you can sit down and you can move forward, even if what you write is not particularly good. It's a stepping stone to the next passage, and then you can go back and rewrite it. You can't really do that with poetry, and I think probably not with the short story. It's a thing entire. But I'm a very instinctive writer, and I don't analyse it very much, to be honest. Yeah.
It pays off. And Sarah, I wanted to pick you up on what you were talking about truth and non-fiction being not the truth, the non-truth. Because I must say I share with you, I don't know if I share your theory on non-fiction, but I certainly share your theory about fiction being where you can find truth.
Well, I think what we non-fiction writers toiling on the lower slopes, if I may speak for all of us, what we like to say is there's a truth that's truer than the truth. And that's what we aim at. And so it's okay to rearrange the facts because, you're aiming at a truth that's truer than the truth. I mean, it doesn't matter what really happened. What matters is what you're trying to get at. And all I want to write about, and I think I can speak for others, is what it is to be human, and using a non-fiction vehicle to do that is just a vehicle. I mean, poetry, I suppose, the difference between poetry and prose is that poetry communicates before it's understood, and that's a sort of higher level of composition, and I think writers find their own voice and level. I think one thing I'm interested in is how few people are, if you think about the great writers, our great heroes and heroines, how many of them can you say have written in non-fiction and fiction are equally good at both? Maybe somebody in the audience would like to shout out some names. There aren't very many. For example, all the travel writers the generation above me, who are all the blokes, they all wrote loads of novels, and all the novels are rubbish. But they can't stop writing them because they have this idea that it's this higher form, and that's what they're really born to do. And if you really think about who is, George Orwell's a really good one. I'll give you another one, Salinger.
Or Oscar Wilde.
Well,
De Profundis.
I don't think he's any good at either, but that's my opinion. Orwell's an obvious one. Salinger's another. Not bad, Sybil Bedford, although I'm not wild about the novels. Actually, Steinbeck. But, we're struggling here. So, I don't know how interesting it is if someone's born a fiction writer or a non-fiction writer, but I think it informs the notion of form, if you like.
I think that's right. And that's what we're talking about here, isn't it, with the short story?
Yes, and I think that, as a non-fiction writer, I'm very interested in the essay, which is currently, very unfashionable, although I think its time will come again. There's, loads of things I want to read and write about at 3,000 words or 5,000 words rather than 100,000.
I agree.
And I think it's unfortunate and impoverishes the current literary climate that actually you can't write that type of non-fiction essay because, where are you going to publish it? The New Yorker? Well, that's, not very many per year. But the essay is akin to the short story, I think, in its differences between the novel and the full-length non-fiction book. And I think there's real reasons as readers and writers to go in for the smaller one of the two. And I wish that there were more forums, I say, for essays, but that time will come again. I can't remember what the question was now.
That's fine. It's good. You covered the waterfront in a good travel writer style. One of the things I was thinking when I read the stories again is that the whole, we took the theme of journeying, and, here's an example. I mean, I think even the Flannery O'Conner, she's got the journey of the general, the journey of people going on the journey, the understanding of the journey they've been on. But it made me start thinking that maybe all fiction is a journey, to say. Sorry, I'm going to fling you that question. And I was also thinking, as I said in the introduction I wrote here, that it's kind of, it's all a journey from innocence. Do you think that's true, Susie? Nice question.
Yes. I can't think how to answer that question.
Okay. But the question is journeying the great literary theme? Is the real question, actually, is it?
Well, I suppose what I'm really interested in is the kind of definition of human nature, and I guess that definitely involves a journey, doesn't it? And the novel has traditionally been a sort of great place to examine growing up or a marriage or things that are sort of transitional in that way.
And do you think, well, let me ask you the question about the form, because you've played with both forms as well, the same as Helen. Do you do it as Helen does, that you think of the form first, or the
well,
story?
I have a funny extra thing that every week I write a newspaper column that's a bit like a short story, so it'll start with something seemingly silly, like eating a biscuit. Yesterday I ate a biscuit that was called a chocolossus, and it inspired me to some other kind of unbiscuity place. But I suppose what I really like is putting together side by side two things that don't obviously seem to have that much in common, and by placing them side by side finding connections, and I suppose that's a sort of journey as well.
And the other thing I want to ask all of you, actually, is just to, you've brought up the hierarchy question, but even just within fiction and the novella or the short story, just the poetry, maybe for the second. But if you think about, I've been thinking of people like Alice Munro, who's my hero,
And mine.
Okay, sure. She's just got a huge award in Canada, and she's never written a novel. Grace Paley, I wonder if people know her, actually, American writer who's now died. But she had this wonderful phrase, which I know she's lifted from someone else, but anyway, I'll credit her, which is life is short and art is long, which is why when people say, why don't you write a novel, she always said life is short and art is long, because she was busy. So they just did stories, but a lot of short story writers feel that they need to write novels, and, I'd like to hear what your view is that. Sorry, we'll start with the fiction writers on that one.
Well, I've only ever written 3 short stories, so I'm very new to this, but I'm much more interested really in texture than in plot, and so it seems to me that short stories can almost be entirely about texture in a way that novels can't really, or novels have to be so good if they're just about texture. And so that I'm excited about that, exploring that further.
And there are short story writers who are also novelists, and I was thinking of Edna O'Brien, for example. I've just been reading her the Faber collection of her stories, and how much I like her short stories, probably more.
I agree.
More than her novels in the end. And that may... And I love Doris Lessing's short stories. I think probably if I were to take one book of Doris Lessing's, it might be her collected short stories in the end. Short stories are also infinitely rereadable. If you look at Elizabeth Taylor's short stories, for example, they're infinitely rereadable. And I'm interested in something Sara said then about the essay, because I think we are entering a very interesting era as writers, readers and publishers, where the traditional barriers to forms are dissolving, in that you can have, for example, the Wasteland app being produced, and why would somebody not as readily read an essay on screen if they're going to read on screen? We have to then ask, why did the 3-decker novel come along in the first place? Why did the novel then become 85,000 words? Why were authors told that you can't publish a volume of short stories because of your EPOS figures, which is quite a scary thing that a lot of authors are told, because if they publish a volume of short stories which might not sell as many copies as their novels, then when they publish their next novel, all the publishing, the distribution and marketing world will look at those sales figures. And these are brutal facts, but maybe something about changes in technology and changes in the way things are read will make us more open, say, to the essay, or more open to the, just saying, well, I'm going to buy 3 short stories by that author because I'm longing to read them. And we tend to talk about technology in terms of disaster and the bad things it's going to do to us as writers and readers, but I think there could be good things too, especially for the short story and for poetry.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you that, Sarah, because we're experimenting with short story, for example, on ebooks. I think you're completely right. I think the ebook is going to change it again. And so I'm just wondering, do you see that with...
Well, I'm quite sure that everything in the future is certain disaster. What Helen says about the flexibility of genre applies particularly to literary non-fiction writers like me. When I started off 30 years ago, if I suggested anything other than a straightforward, what was called then a travelogue, there'd be tremendous panic among the marketing department of Jonathan Cape, saying, where are Waterston's going to put it on the shelves? And that breakdown of non-fiction, of literary non-fiction, I think has been particularly beneficial to women, in that now it's okay for non-fiction to be a bit of that and a bit of this, and hopefully quite a lot of the other. And it doesn't have to be... that hybridisation of non-fiction, I think, has been creatively helpful to writers. And as I say, particularly, I think, probably to women writers who don't tend to think quite so much in genres. And there was one other point I was going to make on that topic, which is that probably my top short story writer, if of all time, whatever, forever, would always be Chekhov. And he wrote an extremely good non-fiction book about a journey he made to the other side of Russia, and wrote a letter to his editor back when he was on the journey and writing the book, saying this is the first non-fiction book he'd ever written, having been at the fiction game for many decades. And he said, I feel like I'm wearing the wrong trousers. And whilst, of course, I'm not comparing myself to Chekhov in any way, I have written one short story, and I felt like that. I was just wearing the wrong trousers, and this had to stop.
That's nice. Okay, I'm going to finish with one question to each of you about your favourite. I think we should send the audience out to read more short stories. So we've got your favourite, Chekhov.
I like Chekhov very much as well, but recently I've been reading the short stories of Jean Stafford, an American writer, and there's one I particularly like, probably her most famous one, called Children Aboard on Sundays, and it's about 2 people who are wandering around the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and it becomes clear, obviously suffered from in various different ways since they've last seen each other, and they catch sight of each other and both know it would be a complete disaster if they start a conversation, let alone go for a drink, but that's what they do.
It's very hard if you had to think of a desert island short story, because
that'd be good.
So many short story writers that I love, and some, such as D.H. Lawrence, who are less fashionable at the moment than they might be, a story like Fanny and Annie, for example. But I probably would take with me still Prelude and At the Bay by Catherine Mansfield, because of the wonderful musicality, precision, moving sense of an entire life compressed into this vehicle that just floats, absolutely perfectly floats within the imagination. I mean, what a writer, and also what a gift for distillation. And you would never really probably get tired of reading those stories, but there are many. And Frank O'Connor too, not read so much at the moment, but My First Confession, great story, very funny.
Do you want to add anything else?
I think it's all been said. I agree with both of your suggestions, and yours also.
What an agreeable panel we have. So I'm going to just finish off with the Tolstoy theory about fiction, which I'm sure all of you know anyway, but I do love it, which is all great literature is one of 2 stories. A man, although we would say a woman goes on a journey, or a stranger comes to town.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone on the platform, Susie, Helen, Sarah and Lennie, for transporting us into the short story zone for demonstrating how flexible the short story can be and how resonant. I feel we've been introduced to characters that are unforgettable. The irresistible Marigold, the young female soldier toying with Chanel No. 5 on her way to Afghanistan, and of course the indomitable general. So I'd like to thank you all very much, and Lennie for steering us through such a stimulating and rich session. Thank you all very much. I'd like just to add one final word. Asham is all about aspiring writers and giving an opportunity, giving a springboard to aspiring writers. As the administrator of the Asham Trust, Carol Buchan, said so eloquently in a reception just before this event. We also, in order to celebrate Small Wanda's 10th birthday, decided that we wanted to honour a writer at the other end of his or her career, a writer with long-standing a record of long-standing excellence in the short story form. So we've established a new award for this in order to honour such a writer, together with the University of Chichester. And we're going to be announcing the first award tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. That's an extra event that doesn't appear in our brochure. If any of you would like to attend that award at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, it's going to be complimentary tickets because we haven't advertised it. Just leave your... and the event will last from 11 to about 11:45 tomorrow morning, when we'll announce the recipient of that first award. If you would like to attend, then leave your name at the box office on the way out, and we'll make sure there's a place for you. If you go home and want to think about it, then just give us a call and let us know that you'd like to come tomorrow morning. And the last thing for me to say is, if you wouldn't mind remaining in your seats while all the authors and Lennie come off the platform to the back of the barn, to the City Books bookstall, where they'll be very willing to sign books. You'll find their own work apart from what's represented in the Asham Anthology, the wonderful Asham Anthology, and of course Flannery O'Conner, who appears in the especially beautiful folio edition. Thank you all for being such a wonderful audience.